A lot of times on my channel, I'll talk about how certain comic book artists have a style unto their own. It's a style that you can pick out of a lineup. But the comic book artist that truly has maybe the most unique style of comics that worked over the course of decades and still, even after their passing, has not been imitated by anyone, by any stretch of the imagination, and their style still stands out as this amazing, iconoclastic, just work of art, page after page that they produced, is Richard Corben. Truly a master cartoonist and truly just stands out as a unique talent and a titan of the industry. But one of my favorite reprint projects of recent years that started out in 2023 is the Richard Corben Library by Dark Horse Comics. In today's video, I'm going to go over every volume that has come out so far and talk about what makes them so great. So stay tuned and watch this video until the end. And we're back. Thank you for joining me. My name is Taylor. This is Taylor Talks Comics. Please give the video a thumbs up. Comment down below with any of your thoughts on Richard Corben or underground comics or horror comics. Whatever you want to talk about, I'll reply to you in the comments down below. And subscribe if you haven't already. I'm doing 31 days of horror comics all throughout the month of October, and you don't want to miss out on that. Hitting the notification bell will alert you whenever one of my new videos pops up. And if you have missed some of the videos in October, don't fret. I have a handy-dandy playlist for you called Halloween Horrors 2025. You can catch up on all the videos you missed out on so far over there. And if you want to look at last year's videos, because I did do this last year, there's also a playlist for that, Halloween Horrors 2024. All right, so today we're talking Richard Corben. Like I said in the preamble, this is one of my favorite reprint projects that exist in comics today. There's a lot of great reprint archival type projects, but this might be one of my absolute favorites. And it has largely to do with the restoration and how they have been preserving this master titan of a comic book artist and his work. So I'm going to go through all that as I flip through each book and talk about what makes them so great. But I do want to show off the beautiful spines in a closer way because they do look really, really great on the shelf. So far we've had 8 volumes released, with a 9th volume on the way in November, and I think we have more solicited after that even. But let me pull up the camera just a little bit. All right, so that's what they're gonna look like on the shelf there. Each spot of where it says Richard Corben's name is in a shiny gold font there. And then we have the lettering of each story in the volume number, if they have volume numbers, Fanagore Press at the bottom, which is Richard Corben's original publishing company, and then Dark Horse. So very uniform, very great, very beautiful. Now, you might notice that not all these have volume numbers. That's because Din, which was 5 volumes, is one story. All 5 of those is one story. Murky World is a standalone volume, as is Dimwood and ROWLF. Those are all standalone volumes as well. The idea of this project is to reprint all of Richard Corben's work, that they can at least, that they have rights to it at Dark Horse, in this format. And they still have a ton of stuff to put out in addition to this. And the reason why they don't all have volume numbers, they need to start off 1 through whatever, is that you don't have to buy every volume if you don't want. If I just go through one of these and one of them stands out to you to try out Richard Corben for the first time, you can do that, absolutely. If you are going to look up Din, or if that's one that strikes your curiosity, I would try to pick up volume 1, but the rest of them can be standalone volumes. Now, these are, I should also say too before I move on, these have not been released in the publishing order that they came out. Murky World was the first volume that Dark Horse put out, for instance, and that's one of the most recent stories that Richard Corben did prior to his passing. Then Din 1 through 5 is some older material from the 70s, 80s, and maybe 90s. I can't remember exactly how long that bleeds over into. Then Dimwood is a more recent output as well, and then ROWLF is an older story that took place in the came out in the early 70s. But you don't have to have read them in order. You can read them in any order, really. But it is nice to have on the shelf, and I haven't quite decided if I want to put them in publication order of the original stories or publication order of how Dark Horse has released them. It is nice to read an artist's work from beginning of the career to the end. And that might be something I do when that's all said and done and they've released the last volume. But for now, I just put them in order that Dark Horse has released them. And that's the order I'm going to go over them in the video. So this is the first one. This is Murky World, the first one that they released. And each one of these has a dust jacket. And I am going to be careful because there is a lot of adult content in these books. So I might not be able to show you everything as far as underneath the dust jackets of every volume, that kind of thing. But I'll do my best to do that and show you off the most I can. But underneath the dust jacket, you can see that it's just a blown up image of what the front cover looks like on the dust jacket. And then it has the same title. And then Murky World, Richard Corben on the back. Now, each of these also includes an introduction by a famed cartoonist or artist or stalwart of the industry themselves, all largely talking about how great Richard Corben was and what made him a fan originally and all that jazz. Some of them talking about their experience working with him. And those have been really informative. And on this one, the in papers are really great. It is the same on front and back. But here you can see the credits, and we have Richard Corben, Mike Shields, Richard Corben, Beth Corben Reed, and then it tells you what's included in here. And then here's the introduction. This one's written by John Lansdale, I think. No, Mike Mignola. Mike Mignola writes the first introduction. If you are a longtime fan of Hellboy, then you know that Mike Mignola and Richard Corben collaborated on some Hellboy stories. And Dark Horse has even released a volume collecting just the Richard Corben Hellboy stuff as well, if you're interested in that. But a really fun introduction. Mike Mignola talking about his history with working with Corben and how he's a fan of him, and prior to even working with him, and then all that stuff. So, and here's a picture of Mike Mignola and Richard Corben together. And then we get into it. And now Murky World, it was an interesting choice in my opinion to start off with this from Dark Horse. It wasn't, I don't think it's like an iconic story necessarily by Richard Corben. You do see some like the famed lettering that he would put in there. I think it maintains his lettering in here. Is that? Yeah, art and letters by Richard Corben. In some of the volumes, we do have Nate Pico's relettering them because the originals weren't that good. But at least the lettering wasn't. But you still see his famed lettering. That's very iconic of Richard Corben. And these stories all are like genre stories. Like they're either fantasy, sword and sorcery, science fiction, or gothic horror. And that's where it ties into the month that we are in with October. You can see like the beheading here and the blood splatter. But this has a lot of digital art done to it, I believe. And I'm trying to remember the process of it because there is a lot of back matter and things that explain all this to you. But I can't remember the process of Corben working with digital art. I think he was one of the first artists to go digital with coloring and his work itself. But my favorite Richard Corben art is probably largely his earlier work when he's working pen and pencil on paper, and you can see him working out the style because I think his artwork had this weird kind of digital style to it already, originally, like from the get-go. Like these giant monsters, just amazing stuff. But then when he went digital, it kind of bled into this kind of digital looking atmosphere and things. So I do lean heavier towards his original stuff, but he still is an amazing storyteller, even in this age. So when I said that was being relettered in some of the volumes, which I'll get to, I do want to talk about the restoration of this project because that's largely where I come into how wonderful this project is. If you just told me they're reprinting Richard Corben's work in any format, any fashion, I would have been excited and bought every volume just because I'm a big fan of Richard Corben. But what makes this truly one of my favorite reprint projects is how these are being restored. And that's by Jose Villarrubia, who has been kind of the head of this project in whole. And that's from the recoloring of it, which he prefers to call it restoration because he's trying to bring the colors back to their original forms, but with color guides by Richard Corben. If he found color guides from Richard Corben or came across them, or interviews or things where Richard Corben said that he didn't like the coloring of a certain project, he would listen to that. But Jose Villarubia, in my opinion, is the best person in comics when it comes to restoration of old classic comics. He did the Lynn Wein, Bernie Wrightson Absolute Swamp Thing, which is one of my favorite books in my collection. And he did a great job on that book. Here's the underneath the dust jacket of Den #1. And I have a video on that book if you are interested. So this is Den Volume 1. In papers are the same. Underneath the dust jacket's great. Just a blown up image of the... Underneath the dust jacket is just a blown up image of what's on the dust jacket. But this is Den. This is probably, I'd say, his most iconic character in all of his creations. And Jose Villarubia himself is writing the introduction for this one. It's talking about the foreword. And then Patton Oswalt writes the introduction for it, which is cool to get both their perspectives. But right away, look at this coloring. So this is what blew my mind. This is some of the first Richard Corben I came in contact with. And this, to me, looks like if someone painted the greatest fantasy comic ever on the side of an Astro van of a heavy metal band driving down the road. That's what the color kind of reminds me of. It has like this psychedelic aspect to it. But it's this fantasy story. And it's a story of this guy, Den, who has found a way to go from being a little boy, a little minuscule, pesky little boy, to being the epitome of man, the epitome of muscles and just ultimate masculinity. And that's kind of the story that we're getting here of Den, as we're trying to flip through here as quickly as possible to find a page that doesn't have any sort of... And this first appeared in Heavy Metal Magazine. The early Heavy Metal Magazine blew comic book fans away with Mobius and Philippe Druillet and Richard Corben, among others. Just all had different styles to them, but just looked like nothing else on the comic book racks. And Richard Corben's style was like right away just mind-blowing because it looked different than anything else. And if you've watched the Heavy Metal animated movie, you'll recognize the Den character as he was voiced by John Candy. Again, the lettering. I think this one was relettered by Nate Picos, but I don't think they relettered like the special effects and things. The special effects, the sound effects and things. But it is credited Nate Picos for the lettering, and I think he tried to mimic a style that was like Richard Corben. But anyway, so he was in the animated film, the Den character, voiced by John Candy, which I feel like is a really interesting choice. I love John Candy, but not the first voice that came to mind when I read Den. But this first volume still sticks in my head. I think I did a TikTok video where it's like comic books that still stick in my head or live rent-free in my head. And this is one of them. And it's the ending of the comic that really stood out to me because this is like the ultimate story of masculinity, right? And but the ending has this wild story, trippy story about where it's maybe like the most feminist story told of this era, in my opinion, by a man, probably because a man's telling the story. But it's just like the ultimate feminism and how women have power over man in certain aspects. And the climax of the story, no pun intended, is just brilliant, and it still sticks in my head because it's like it took me off guard and blew my mind. So just keep that in mind when you get to the ending, and you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Now at the end, we have a first edition foreword by Fritz Lieber that's written in 1977, and the art of Richard Corben written by Bruce Jones. And then we have some back gallery matter here as well. And this is Grimwit. This is one of the underground titles that I can't remember if Richard Corben, is that all Richard Corben's work in Grimwit? I can't remember if that's one or one that he just like edited with his friends and things. But yeah, that's the first volume of Den. And then we get to the second volume, and it has a foreword on this one by, I think, introduction by Walt Simonson, which is amazing. I'll always love his perspective on comics. And then I think Guillermo del Toro does a blurb on the back. So this one came out years later in real time, like when he was first publishing it. And you can see that instantly the kind of the colors and things have grown and evolved since then. But it is the continuation of the Din character. And it's just, again, this exploration of how Richard Corben views masculinity and feminism, and how that story is being told through this fantasy story of sword and sorcery. And it's just amazing. It's one of the greatest fantasy stories I've ever read, and I absolutely love it, especially coming from the underground comics. Like, there was stuff in the back from Jose Villarrubia talking about the restoration process. But Richard Corben coming from like the undergrounds, because he came from the underground comics scene with comics with an X. Matt Kent writing the introduction in this one, and but he had something that those other guys haven't. Like, when I think of underground comics with an X, I think of like Robert Crumb. I think of Spain Rodriguez. I think of S. Clay Wilson. I think of like the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. And those all had like a comedic sense to them. They weren't really genre storytelling. I guess S. Clay Wilson a little bit was dabbled in that kind of storytelling. But this is like true just genre storytelling, whether it be fantasy, sci-fi, or horror, or a blend of all of them. But it still was printed and published in the underground scene. And that was largely where Richard Corben first made a name for himself. Here's the 4th volume of Din, and the thickest volume. And Colin Bunn writes the introduction for this one. And then here's the story. And so these were all serialized through different formats as well. Like, they're serialized. I love, again, that lettering all throughout there. And just like, this is when he's still working pen and ink on paper. And the coloring, like, just amazing. But they're all serialized through like Heavy Metal at first. And then it was serialized through, like I said, Richard Corben's self-published endeavors. And then I think maybe Dark Horse Presents might have even had some. But the great thing about these books is it puts them all in order for you, in a great reading order. You don't have to worry about tracking down certain issues of things. And it's just a blast of an experience to read through and see how this character progresses. It's like having, people are big fans of like create your own titles from like Image now, but it's like having kind of that style of storytelling. You have one guy telling the story of this one character he created all the way throughout. Here's Din Volume 5, and Christos Gage writes the foreword, and we dive right into it. And this is a little bit when he starts getting into more digital art that I talked about, but with the Din character, that giant dinosaur monster, or lizard monster, maintaining again the Richard Corben lettering, which just evokes like so much underground comics to me, that lettering. But yeah, this is just like, you look at this stuff and you're just like, who draws like this? Like, I've never seen a comic book artist like this. And even like the greats like Bill Sienkiewicz and Jack Kirby and Mike Mignola all have had imitators after them that might have missed the mark or might have nailed the mark, but regardless, we're able to, in some fashion, recreate what those guys created. I don't know of any artist that was able to recreate Richard Corben. And that's what I think makes him stand out, even today. Like, this stuff was coming out 50 years ago, some of the stuff, like the early Din stuff, and the next book I'll talk about, not this one, was 50 years ago, and it just was a totally unique style. Now, this one is Dimwood. Underneath the dust jacket's a blown-up image of the front cover. And this is a later story as well, just like Murky World, later in his career. And this is more of when he's diving into like the gothic horror side of things. And Richard Corben did a lot of these, like Edgar, not this one, isn't this, but this era of his artwork and storytelling was like doing like adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe. And he even did like, I think it was Hunt of Horror. He did for Marvel Max comics. And I kind of hope that Dark Horse is able to build a relationship with Marvel to where they can reprint his Marvel work. I think that'd be amazing in this format. Marvel has had Fantagraphics recently reprint Marvel Max era stuff from Howard Chaykin. And Dark Horse has a couple Marvel books coming out right now. The Art of Spider-Man and Art of Fantastic Four. So it's not crazy to think that the Luke Cage stories and the Incredible Hulk stories that Richard Corben did for Marvel, that they would be reprinted maybe even in this exact format. Would be amazing. I'd absolutely love that. This is ROWLF. Maybe the one that took me the most by surprise because I love this one so much. But Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli fame, and just one of the true like pioneers and stalwarts of anime in Japan, wrote the introduction for this one, or the foreword, and it talks about how he was working on an adaptation of ROWLF with Richard Corben, which is amazing that those two iconic artists were collaborating on something. But But this is a early 1970s era Richard Corben, and it's all in black and white. But this is amazing to see his art style in this, because there's like, this is just him working pen and pencil on with inks on the board, and there's a lot more cross hatching and things that he's working on, because it's a younger artist that's not as confident in his abilities to draw more of a clean line like he would in his later years. But I love that. I love seeing his early work, and just seeing how it develops over time, and how he starts to build and model scenery and things into what he would eventually do. And this is like a werewolf story, The Beast of Wolfton. It collects 4 different stories in here that all kind of are of the same era and have the same themes in it. But this is probably one of the more horror titles of the ones that have been released so far. And I absolutely love this one. I love the black and white artwork. You don't see a lot of Corben in black and white, which, don't get me wrong, his color work like this blows me away every time I see it. Again, it looks like the best paintings on the side of an Astro van you could find. But yeah, there's a lot of great back matter throughout these as well. But truly one of the great reprint projects out there. Get your hands on these books. I don't know if they've reprinted any or how long this will go on, so you want to pick them up while you can. But yeah, there's 8 volumes so far, with the 9th one coming out. I think it's November 18th that the next one comes out. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please give the video a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts on Richard Corben, underground comics, on horror comics, whatever you want to talk about. I'll reply to all comments. And I appreciate you commenting down below. And subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any of my other horror videos throughout the month of October. And everyone, keep talking comics.